Maybe the highest praise I can deliver, it's just a really nice laptop. This episode of Some Gadget Guy is brought to you by viewers like you, all the folks who share content on social media, and the incredible generosity of my patrons. Patreon.com/SomeGadgetGuy. More on those awesome geeks later in the video. At the top of this video, please excuse everything that's happening right here. I'm still recovering from COVID, but you know, YouTubers don't get to take sick days, and I'm really wanting to continue a conversation about this right here. I've been rocking the Surface Laptop 7 for a couple of weeks now and carted it off for some international travel, and the experience has been relatively drama-free. I'm not sure what folks are expecting or why we're stuck in this cycle where we feel this need to demolish anything new. But Windows on ARM is decently mature now, and the Qualcomm chip in this laptop is properly competing at a performance per price I think a lot of folks are gonna like. There's not much controversy here if we're aiming to review a product for what it is and we aren't just criticizing it for what it's not. The build on a Surface is always clean, if a bit stark. The frame is reassuringly sturdy. It's not the lightest machine that you can buy, but the 15-inch machine that I'm using here is delightfully flex-free. And you know that feeling I'm describing when you kind of pick it up from a corner. It's rigid, and there's almost no flex on the frame or under the keyboard. The hinge is sturdy if it slides just a bit more than I would like when I'm kind of holding it out, but there's a nice amount of resistance for opening the lid. It's not too stiff, so the whole machine lifts off the table, but it's also not so floppy that it might not completely close if you try to slide it in a bag. The biggie, I really wish Microsoft would give us more ports. It's one of the main gripes I have with any Surface. We've got one USB-A and two USB-C, and only on one side of the laptop. There really needs to be at least one other USB-C on the opposite side. The magnetic charging cable is cool, but I'll still need to connect a dock anyway to get all the ports and multiple monitors that I really need. And the micro SD is nice when traveling and transfer speeds aren't too far off from my dedicated card reader. And I relied on this while I was traveling and transferring content. Moving over to the middle, I really like this keyboard. Key travel is nice, there's a good tactile response, and it's a quiet keyboard. I personally wish it had just a little bit more chunk to the action, because I really like clacky keys, but it's a beautiful feel for a portable machine, and especially one that's not advertised as a gaming machine. In my early look at the Surface 7, I think I undersold the touchpad, and this is a really nice touchpad. Made by Sensel, it's a large glass area with a touch grid and a haptic motor instead of switches or buttons. This is one of those sneaky upgrades that Lenovo and Dell users have also likely been appreciating. It starts subtle, like, oh, that's nice. But then after you get used to it, you really miss it when you go back to an older touchpad. Clicks are perfect across the entire Surface, with this small corner kind of carved out for right-clicking. The action is near silent, which is what bugs me about a lot of older touchpads. You feel it, and that's it. And it still works with light touches. A light tap for left click, 2-finger tap for right click, or you can press into the pad, and you can kind of customize the feel of the depth of this pad. 3-finger swipes to clear your desktop or pinch to zoom actions. It's everything I've wanted. We got to get out of those habits, you know, just knee-jerk complaining about Windows touchpads because they used to be terrible. Windows and a large collection of apps have finally gotten better at gestures. I was saying pinch to zoom. Now you remember when you would pinch a Windows touchpad and you get those hard skipping zoom levels like 10%, 50%, 200%, that's gone now. It's smooth, and even when you're in a browser like Firefox, it just slides with your fingers. Now, I don't have much to add about the display from my first look videos, and honestly, it's not much different than previous generation Surface laptops. It's a nice, pretty touchscreen LCD, high refresh rate. I think a lot of folks will like the aspect ratio when you're snapping documents side by side. The biggest problem I faced for this build, I've already lost a foot off the bottom of the laptop, and I'm really bummed about that. I'm looking up which replacement set to get from iFixit. It's looking like it's gonna be about 20 bucks to ship those out. Boo. But that's about it in terms of drama. That's the most dramatic thing that's happened so far. One of the exciting things, how Microsoft has radically shifted their repair strategy. Now, I've not been brave enough to take mine apart yet. But not only are parts and repair guides available, but the internals are marked with QR codes to help guide people to repair information. Now, there's not much we can tweak on the inside of this machine, but at some point I probably will upgrade the SSD and double the storage. I wish we had options to upgrade RAM after you buy the thing. We'll have to look to AMD and Intel solutions to see if they do that any better. And that brings us to the performance. And it's great. Our core tests and benchmarks, we've got CPU performance that's roughly between an Intel Core Ultra 7 and Core Ultra 9. And GPU performance that's slightly ahead of Intel Iris graphics and a bit more behind AMD's current Radeon integrated graphics. We get the best performance when we're running ARM native code, but the recent improvements to emulation, even when using an x86 program, performance is still really good. There's no one simple metric to grade software optimization. Like, you can't just say when emulating x86 you will lose 10% of your performance, but even if you did lose 20%, you'd still be rocking a premium performance experience that compares roughly to a last generation Core i7, maybe even a Core i9. I'm lucky that I can choose to support software companies I like. So if Adobe is dragging their heels on ARM support, I'm happy to edit my video in DaVinci Resolve. I switched to Affinity a while back to edit my photos. I still load up GIMP for basic multi-layered edits. There's a lot of good stuff already available as ARM native code. I absolutely feel for the folks that are trapped by a specific program they need to use, but that's a developer issue. If you want to use the hardware you want to use, it's got to be frustrating to see a big developer dragging their heels. But that headline should read, software company is frustrating users. The headline should not be, ARM isn't ready. You should just keep waiting forever until ARM fails and then just keep using x86 like you were before and you were unhappy with your laptop battery life. But I digress. I'm going to be detailing performance more on my Patreon, and I'm debating whether or not I need to create a bunch of bar graphs. But I really can't understand how techies aren't more impressed with this performance. This is Qualcomm's fourth major PC-focused architecture. In 4 generations, we've gone from mediocre tablet performance in Windows to outright embarrassing chips like the 13th generation mobile Core i9. I've recently been playing with the Core Ultra 7, the 155H, and Qualcomm correctly targeted that chip as a main competitor. They go toe-to-toe in most performance tests. So I feel Qualcomm appropriately positioned this when we as the press were able to go hands-on for those early benchmarks. There's been a lot of gnashing of teeth and demands to prove that it's better than Intel or AMD, and I think a lot of those folks are missing the point. This is a 12 performance core laptop, no efficiency cores, and at its most efficient, it sips a lot less battery than an Intel system with a split, a divide between big performance cores and little efficiency cores. Under daily workload, X Elite is just better behaved. I know I'm comparing different systems and configurations and designs, and I'm drawing some data even from my little mini PC reviews, but I've never owned a Windows laptop that runs this cool and stays this quiet even when it's running at full bore. When we run X Elite at its highest level, it's gonna drain that battery. It's a computer, kind of like any other, but this is a great overall performance per watt. So like other slim premium PCs, I think it's important that folks are buying the right fit for their needs. If you're the kind of person who needs an NVIDIA GPU, you would not have purchased an AMD laptop with integrated Radeon graphics, right? That's kind of a no-brainer. But for some reason, a lot of techies are presenting this like it somehow needs to be different. It's kind of the same situation. You wouldn't recommend this to someone who needed a beefy gaming laptop. We still loosely have this class of laptop called an Ultrabook, and we expect a certain level of performance out of those machines. But now, this is delivering CPU performance that starts to close in on harder working laptops, mobile workstations, but overall with better daily runtime. So comparisons are always going to be difficult. We want to classify products correctly. I like taking this to automobile metaphors. Someone who needs a turbo diesel work truck isn't gonna be impressed with you if you offer them a quick little hatchback. What I have here is a computer that will absolutely lose a rendering test against a gaming laptop with a big dedicated GPU. But I can edit a lot longer on battery, I can still render pretty quickly, and the fans stay quieter, and then when I need to, I can charge the whole thing on a smartphone power brick, which I can't do on that beefy gaming laptop. Or another example, I use Handbrake a lot. An Intel laptop can beat this plugged in, especially when we look at Intel QuickSync. But with very early support for Qualcomm's SoC, we do get some interesting results. On battery, we can run a standard CPU transcode. But then we also have the Media Foundation encoder. The Media Foundation encoder on battery was actually about 25% slower than using the CPU, but it used 40% less power accomplishing the same task. If you'll pardon another old man rant, I think the thing that gets old is the techie speculation. Someone will say something overly simplistic like, my VPN doesn't work on ARM. And that's probably true. But then a bunch of Intel and AMD fans run with that and amplify, no VPN works with ARM PCs. But that's ludicrous and kinda stupid. Last generation of ARM PCs, I showed how WireGuard worked on my old ARM tablet. It works here too. Now, it is very frustrating if your VPN doesn't currently work, but you see how that's a VPN issue, not an ARM issue. Yelling at Microsoft doesn't really do anything. You've got to send that message up to the VPN developer. Instead of actually looking up current information, this cult of PC techies just keeps regurgitating the same inaccurate information, and then that starts to root in as truthiness, which sucks because it becomes a barrier for some people who this would never have been a problem for them, but it scares them away, and then it clouds the issue for where we really do need to see better developer support. We need to know what this really looks like, and we need to know where the problems are if we're going to address those issues. If you're a consumer who just needs a good travel VPN, you would want to know that Surfshark supports ARM. I've been using it for all of my travels, and now you can make a better informed purchasing decision for your services. You see? That's pretty easy. We're all in for some nuanced and complicated conversations over the next couple months. There are some really exciting launches on the horizon, but we want to make sure that this is an accurate and fair oranges to oranges presentation of the data. And I think the context matters, because it's also worth reiterating that early updates for the laptop and from app developers are already showing performance improvements. Anything we discuss today is likely going to be outdated information in a week or 3, which is where I suppose we should probably talk about gaming. And another thing that gets old really fast is when a gaming bro gatekeeper says the games you like, they're not real gaming, or some other such nonsense. I'm a much bigger fan of play what you like, and you're also a gamer. It's another one of those things I'm starting to feel like a broken record here, but Qualcomm responsibly positioned this product as not a gaming chip. I'm really not sure how Qualcomm could have been any clearer, spoon-feeding the techies and the media and the reviewers, this is not a gaming chip. The Surface Laptop 7 is not a gaming PC, but it can play a lot of great games. Years ago, when they started adopting these Orion cores, I believe Qualcomm was targeting a bump above Iris and Vega integrated graphics. And in that, they've completely succeeded. Remember, these roadmaps take years to play out. Over that window, both Intel and AMD have succeeded this, because this does fall behind newer Radeon integrated graphics and the newer Intel Arc graphics, one of the more exciting updates on the Core Ultra series. But that still means we have a plenty capable GPU in this laptop right here. Older AAA titles are decently compatible. I've shown Control and Hellblade, recently played through just a little of Shadow of the Tomb Raider, and that's decent at medium graphic settings. I was kind of bummed out. Wolfenstein crashes during that intro where you're in the turret. That was definitely a bummer. And then there's something like God of War that's gonna average above 30 frames per second, but the way that it spikes and then dips and then spikes and then dips, it's really not playable. So a bunch of gamer bros are gonna say things like, I guess if you're into older games and indie titles, like that's some kind of huge knock against an Ultrabook, or that dismissive tone around indie action and platformers and RPGs and puzzlers, like those aren't some of the most fun games to play. On the system here, been having a blast looking at Ori and Hollow Knight, Dead Cells, Dandara, Hades. Hades is pinned at 120 frames per second. I can't play Hades at 120 frames per second on my Steam Deck. Hades is real pretty on the Surface screen. I don't know about you, but I kind of feel like Hades is real gaming. So like the example with VPNs, techies aren't looking up data on things like anti-cheat. Instead, they're just regurgitating the speculation of how nothing works. Microsoft has been detailing efforts to improve support for anti-cheat software, and Unity support is improving on ARM as well. It took me 3 minutes of Googling to find the blog post from Microsoft. Now here's the tricky one, and we talked about this a bit during my first look. I'm honestly not sure if we're gonna get complete support for Unreal Engine 5. So a game like RoboCop, my favorite shooting gallery game of all time, that might never be supported here. And I think it's important to bring that up. Any other games built on UE5 in a similar fashion are probably not going to be compatible here. But outside of that specific set of circumstances, improving Unity support in general should mean much better experiences over a wide swath of games. So I can't play Wolfenstein and I can't play RoboCop. Beyond that, it's just not that difficult finding games I really like to play that not only run, but they run really well. So it's not a gaming PC, but it runs a lot of games I like to play. So much so, enough that on my recent trip, I didn't pack my Steam Deck. It's an Ultrabook. This is the kind of PC where you would never buy it if gaming was going to be the primary activity, and it would be irresponsible to market it like that, which no manufacturer is doing. When you have a premium Ultrabooky kind of experience, you still want something that can offer up entertainment, can serve up some distractions, some fun little things throughout your working day, but you're not gonna sit there and grind. That's exactly what the Surface Laptop 7 is capable of delivering. I've never had a ton of patience for people knocking MacBooks for not being the bestest gaming machines. I don't think I would have had much patience at all for someone whining about God of War doesn't work on my M1 Mac. That's not what a MacBook is for. That's not what an Ultrabook is for. What an Ultrabook is for is delivering portable computer power that can be used out in the field away from an outlet. I think this is where x86 has let us down the most over the last 5 or 6 years. With Intel and AMD, I don't believe we've gotten good mobile computers. I think we've gotten terrific portable desktops. I think we've just trained consumers to expect you take your laptop somewhere and you set it down and you plug it in and then you have a respectably powerful computer. I really don't run a ton of battery testing because it kind of breaks my brain. The more intense or granular you get, the less those scientific results really apply to real world use. The flip side is if you go broad with just sort of general daily usage, you're not really getting a good look at what's drawing more power from your battery. Kind of like manufacturer battery estimates. You know, they sound like EPA mileage estimates, right? I don't want to use a word like lie, but I wrote up a post on my Patreon while I was traveling. I tried to see how long this would go on a single charge. We're on vacation, we're traveling, we're hitting hotel rooms and flights, but you know, we want to check in daily, answer some emails, do a little web browsing for touristy things to do. I took a couple video calls, and I went 6 days of light use, and that took the battery down to 30%. So I stopped before I got a proper low battery warning. And the thing that really stands out, I just kind of stopped worrying about exactly what charge my laptop was at. I stopped babying the machine and thinking about it and managing it and planning ahead, charging it ahead of a use, or like making sure it was fully shut down if I didn't think I was going to use it for a while so I could conserve some standby time. I went 6 days of just opening and closing the lid when I needed it, and then on day 6 when I charged it, I plugged it into a smartphone 45-watt charger to top it off, and that was fine while I was using it. Of course, I didn't even take the standalone Surface charger. Into heavier workloads, we can still get to a point where the total system power draw can reach somewhere around 50 watts. That's a lot for a mobile system. What I think is exciting is how well behaved the X Elite is at lower and middle workloads. I like to show off a rendering test for performance, but the thing that my rendering test ignores is how do you edit the project to get to a point where you're gonna render. Sure, you can track the battery under its peak performance, but there was some time that led you up to completing the project so you could render it. It's the thing you notice a lot more when returning to an Intel system. A lot of low-level work is accomplished fine by Intel's new efficiency cores. But back to an example like Resolve or Handbrake, my Intel laptop fans spin up a lot more just opening a program or loading project files. If I render in Resolve on a Core Ultra 7 using Intel QuickSync, I can usually beat the X Elite in render time, but I would have had more runtime to edit the project if I was using X Elite. And this is what's tough about talking about battery. This is anecdotal. And it's not even completely fair because I'm still using Resolve, the beta Resolve. But using that beta, this still runs cooler and quieter for the vast majority of the operation. There are still a few situations where plugging it in allows for a higher level of performance, but it's not nearly as stark a difference as on Intel systems. It's almost a completely different laptop when you unplug an Intel Core i7. As I'm shooting this video now, I've had the Surface for just under a month, and I've gone through 11 battery cycles. Never in one continuous, fully discharged, fully recharged kind of cycle. Even for all of the early review testing I've put this through, I'm treating it a bit more like a tablet. You plug it in for a bit, I use it as I need to. I'm thinking a lot less about the actual number in that battery gauge. Moving on, spending all this time with the Surface, the least interesting part is the AI stuff. I think a lot of us techies are underwhelmed with the ridiculous quantity of marketing poured into this Copilot branding and how little is actually consumer accessible right now. Yeah, we can show some webcam tools and those are kind of fun, but we've had those on older ARM PCs and smartphones for a while now. I just wrote up another article on the Patreon looking at the AI creativity tools in the Windows Photo app, and they're kinda useless. It's the sort of thing a user will try a couple of times for the novelty and then promptly forget it exists. I am not bullish on AI, and I don't think we see any real consumer-facing business strategy for the incredible investment being made in data centers. After the crypto craze and NFTs, AI really feels like the next investor bait. Where we might see some practical improvements are in those higher level creative apps that can use an MPU for plugins. That should prove more efficient than using a GPU for things like subject identification and depth mapping, but we're a long way off from any of these companies succeeding in making large language models a necessary part of folks' daily lives. We should be frustrated with Microsoft because they've completely missed the point of why consumers have been excited about MacBooks. The messaging is way too focused on impressing shareholders, and it's confusing end users on what really matters here, what's new, what's different, what's exciting. I love this laptop despite Microsoft's colossal blunders in marketing. And I think a huge chunk of consumers will love this laptop for what it really does well today. Which is about where I think we should wrap this up as I can still talk. My voice is actively failing on me. It's just a really nice laptop. I know it's YouTube and folks are looking for the drama or the entertainment or the debate or the hot takes, but there just isn't anything particularly dramatic or problematic when you're really using it, not when you're benchmarking it and not when you're finding what games fail, but when you're really living with it and using it as the Ultrabook it's advertising itself to be. I don't think that should be particularly surprising either. For the techies who really have been watching Windows on ARM over the last 2 years, we've seen consistent improvements to machines that had significantly lower performance chips. But as mentioned earlier, it's just easier to kind of speculate about what it might be like to use one instead of just really looking into it. And I know you've heard those quotes, and I know you've read those comments. I tried Windows on ARM 4 years ago, and it was garbage, and I guess Windows on ARM just stayed exactly the same for all this time, and there's no possible way I could ever look at it or test it again. So maybe the biggest win of X Elite in general, and the Surface 7 specifically, is that it at least forces a reassessment of the ARM flavor of Windows. It's forcing the PC bros to at least take a second look. Surprise, surprise, it's just a really good competitive computer with pros and cons like any other computer, but delivering a consumer-facing price to performance that makes so much more sense than the last generation of ARM hardware. Just one more, I'm gonna stray from my script here just one more time. The last nitpick of reviewer criticisms. When we know we're talking to AMD and Intel fans in our audience, it's easy to write this off and tell those people, oh, you should just wait for AMD and Intel to realize their potential. But we've been waiting for AMD and Intel to realize their potential since Apple switched to ARM. Well, I'm tired of waiting. Qualcomm snuck in with a solution you can really buy right now. And in the first week you could buy these, the comments on my videos were full of folks saying things like, wait for Intel, wait for AMD. So here's my prediction. I'm positive that we'll see both Intel and AMD leapfrog the X Elite in benchmarks. That's how competition should work. I'm not sure we'll see AMD and Intel outright beat that performance in medium and mixed workload battery life, the battery life I currently enjoy right here. And some of those early benchmarks on really expensive systems are only catching the CPU performance I have in my hands right now. So if it's okay to promote the future of AMD and Intel and to buy those systems on the potential of what AMD and Intel might bring, it also has to be okay to promote the future of X Elite and look at the potential of this system. This machine has gotten updates and performance improvements over the month that I've had it. That's actually not potential. That's real. I'm shooting this a couple of days before I publish it, but right now, AMD Strix Point and Intel Lunar Lake have both faced delays shipping to consumers. Those chips are still potential solutions consumers will eventually be able to buy. We've been doing the AMD versus Intel thing for so long. Isn't it nice to have another direct competitor, price to performance competitor to kind of shake things up a little? And it's why we really have to mean it when we say things like, vote with your wallet. But I've digressed far enough. I'm way off script here. The Surface Laptop 7 is a great machine. This is the best Windows laptop I've ever used. And it succeeds at the Ultrabook mission that we've been promised for years, but I don't think we've ever truly gotten in Windows land. For my specific configuration, this is too expensive. It's crazy expensive to pick up the maxed out RAM version, the 64 gigs of RAM version I have here. There are not many people I would earnestly recommend this configuration to. I feel it needs to be spelled out. With the future of computers focusing on language learning models and machine learning and NPU performance, I really need to recommend people shop above the base model specs. If this AI stuff is used more heavily in the operating system and in future apps and services, buying a laptop with only 16 gigabytes of RAM is going to be an exercise in planned obsolescence. If your needs or your expectations are less machine learning heavy, maybe you just want a really nice laptop for office work or documents, then 16 gigabytes should be fine. But 32 gig is the sweet spot today. It gives you more room and some future-proofing for new software. Unpacking all that AI data needs a lot of space, and that's where your RAM is more critical than it's ever been before. Right now, today, Microsoft is the only company selling a 64 gig config, and it's painful. It's priced really high for that option, and you don't even get a storage bump. It would be nice to see this climb from a 1 terabyte SSD to a 2 terabyte SSD. I'm loath to ever say things like wait and see when we're talking about consumer electronics, but if you need 64 gigs of RAM, then this is the solution. But I personally really want to see what Lenovo and Asus and Dell might do in this space also, if we get more 64 gig options before the holidays. I love this laptop, even in this kind of overkill config. From traveling to getting COVID and quarantining, I didn't want to have to sit in my office in front of my workstation to still get my work done. This has risen to every occasion that it's faced. It's not dramatic or magically different. It's simply a really nice laptop. And as I've been testing and using this, the first folks getting updates on my adventures have been my amazing patrons. I greatly appreciate everyone who supports their favorite YouTube channels, sharing content around social media, but if you have the means, maybe consider checking out the community at patreon.com/SomeGadgetGuy. These videos and reviews would literally not be possible without their support and generosity. They're really helping to keep the lights on here in the Gadget Lab. A huge thank you to those awesome geeks from the bottom of my heart, and for everyone else, I hope you'll check them out. Now, you know where you can find me around the rest of the internet. I'm at SomeGadgetGuy basically everywhere. These days, I'm trying to spend a bit more time on the Mastodons, a little less so on the Facebooks and the Instagrams, and definitely not on the Twitters. And I will catch you all on the next review.